All right, CJ Buck, welcome to the Wolf and Iron podcast. Glad to be finally talking to you.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So I'm a longtime knife fan, a longtime Buck knives fan. I've written a little book. I don't know if you can see it behind me. I've written a little book on pocket knives, and so I have an appreciation for it. Mentioned you guys, learned a little bit about your story. My first recollection of Buck knives comes from my granddaddy, who, I don't remember what knife he gave me first, but it wasn't a Buck knife. He had the big 110 that he used. But I remember
hmm
many times where we would be getting ready to go hunting, or maybe it was the day after hunting, and we're watching Wheel of Fortune or something like that on TV, and he's just
He's sharpening.
he's sharpening that thing, and he'd call
Yeah.
me over to check it out and see how sharp it was, and be impressed and all that kind of stuff. So that was really my first introduction to Buck knives. But you guys have been around for a long time. Tell us a little bit about your role now there with Buck knives, and just kind of how you got started before you became the CEO.
Okay. I'm CEO and chairman of our board. So Buck Knives was started by my great grandfather back in 1902 as a teenager, very young teenager, working as an apprentice blacksmith in a blacksmith shop. So it was a general mercantile on top and a blacksmith shop down below.
Yeah.
You'd pull the wagons around to the back them in, fix the wheels, fix the tack, whatever they needed to do. So my great grandfather, Hoyt Heath Buck, in 1902 in Leavenworth, Kansas, started making knives in this blacksmith shop. He wasn't a big knife guy. It was just a way of picking up scraps picking up scraps off the floor and turning them into dollars.
Yeah. Yeah.
Helping the family. That was what everybody did, all the all the family members. So knife making was a hobby for him, custom knife making, all through his career. He was a logger. He ended up moving up to the Pacific Northwest, where he raised his 7 kids. So he was a logger, sold insurance. He was a preacher. So you can imagine you didn't win arguments with this guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
At
Right.
whatever place you wanted to take it, he could meet you there.
Yeah.
So in the mid 40s, he had retired. He took one last job. He was millwright at the Anderson Dam project near Mountain Home, Idaho.
Yeah.
And his wife's health, my great grandma Daisy, her health started failing. So they decided to get out of Idaho and move in with their oldest son, my grandfather, Alfred Charles Buck, who was in San Diego, California, raising his 4 kids.
Yeah.
And my grandfather had come to San Diego through the Navy, like many people who came to San Diego. Came there with the Navy, loved it, and stayed. And that's why San Diego was such a wonderful, kind of a business-friendly, conservative value conclave in
Yeah.
Southern California.
Yeah. Back in the day.
But,
Yeah.
they were drawing the cream of the crop from across the United States to come out into the defense and join the military or be a defense contractor. So there was state-of-the-art manufacturing expertise and, people from all over the Midwest with that killer work ethic that just came to California. I came to San Diego
Yeah.
and stayed. So great-grandparents moved in with my granddad and his family. They worked together for only a few years, H. Buck and Son Lifetime Knives. And the two of them, my great-granddad did all the blade work. My granddad did all the handle work. My grandmother sewed the sheaths. And it was a little family business, lean-to next to the garage of the house. 1272 Morena Boulevard. That was our first business address, happened to be my grandparents' home address. And they worked together for 2 years before my great-grandmother passed away. Within a year, my great-granddad passed away. So my grandfather, his 2 boys, and his brother-in-law, just family business story.
Yeah.
They sharpened saws, tuned lawnmowers, and made knives in the garage next to the house. My grandfather was a bus driver for a living. If you asked him what he did for a living, he was a bus driver.
Huh.
But this little knife thing on the side. So it was, so we incorporated in 1961. So all through the 50s, the 4 of them, little custom knife shop next to the house. in 1961, we incorporated. My grandfather tapped into some defense contractor expertise, which was on his church choir. So brought a couple of those guys onto a board of directors, incorporated the business on April 7th, 1961. And it was a few years later, we introduced the Buck 110 folding hunter that you mentioned earlier. We introduced that in 1964. And from 1964 until 1980, it didn't matter what we did. We could not keep those knives in stock. We were growing as a business 30 to 50% a year, growing as fast as we could. Never could catch up. I mean, it was just, that's an amazing story. That knife, it was the Goldilocks of knives. It wasn't too big, wasn't too small, wasn't too intimidating looking, just looked quiet and competent, and it delivered easy to carry and stunning success.
And it's still a good looking knife today. I mean,
it is.
It's just a classic.
No, sometimes, with classics, it's when clean lines follow the function, it does just kind of have a certain appeal, and you can see it and sense it, and it feels good in your hand. So it was an amazing success.
Yeah. And so you came in, when did you kind of get started? Because I'm thinking it's a family business. You kind of grew up knowing about it, but when did you jump in and
I grew up catching pollywogs in the drainage ditches while Dad was working on Saturdays. So I came into the business in 1978, just out of high school.
Yeah.
And started working on the line for the summer before heading off to college. So my degree is an emphasis in marketing. So I've always loved branding and messaging. Yeah. I've always loved the marketing side. So I came into the business and just started on the line, worked my way up through, various positions, became president in 1999, just in time for us to have some very crushing years. So that was just a few years before the 9/11 of 2001.
Yeah.
And so we had some very difficult years there, which prompted us to decide to relocate our business from San Diego, California, to Post Falls, Idaho, just over the border from Spokane, Washington.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, what's interesting is that a lot of businesses have faced challenges, obviously, in this last year because of the COVID and stuff like that. So a lot of businesses that may have been open 4 or 5 years, they're doing okay. Things seem to be swimming along pretty well. They don't really have that. They don't have a history to look back on and say, well, here's what we did when things got hard. But you guys have that because you've been around for so many decades now, and you have that. Has that information been helpful, or is every year just every challenge a different kind of challenge?
A little of both. I mean, obviously the brand is what's helpful.
Yeah.
I mean, we've all seen intellectual property sell for great amounts of dollars. So when we're talking to banks and we get into a tight spot, someone without a brand, the bank might just wash their hands of them, where with us, they've stuck it out longer than they might have with someone else. And we've always come through. I mean, God's always provided for us. So we've had our tough spots, but we've always come through. Recently, the whole COVID, we were going into 2020 in the middle of moving from one bank to another when the COVID virus hit.
Yeah.
So March, we had a bank, we had a loan arrangement that was ending in June, and we hadn't signed the new arrangement yet.
Yeah.
But it was all moving just fine. It was all going through just fine. And all of a sudden COVID hit. We went,
Yeah.
No. So we were able to sign that agreement, get our PPP loan. And what's been happening ever since is there's been such an enormous demand for outdoor product, camping, hunting, survival, as well as self-defense, as well as made in America. So all of these things have combined to where we've been unable to keep up with demand since last June.
You know, you mentioned being made in America. So there are a lot of businesses that I grew up with that, you know, if I were just to go by their name brand, I would think that they're probably still USA made, just like they were when I was a kid, and like so many things were when I was a kid. And it's disappointing as we get to be older and we start to look at these brands and realize, no, they've offshored all of their just about everything, right? And all they are now is just the name, and that's
Yeah,
disappointing. And I know you guys, so much of your stuff is still made in the U.S., which is admirable, and that's something that we really stand for as well and stand behind. What's that been like, just maybe in the last, I don't know, 5 or 10 years, because so much of the competition is like, you know, if we can have this made for a fifth of the price we're having it made now, then that's a no brainer. But you guys have
yeah.
remained as much as possible. You've remained, you know, here, you know, stateside.
Well, a very important thing to remember is it's not just about price. Because if you put enough value in something, you can create worth that's irrelevant to the price. So it can balance the price. Where we find ourselves struggling in competing is you have to realize that if say you go to China to have something manufactured, well, there's numerous factories and there's numerous engineering departments that you can tap into and have product designed and manufactured.
Yeah.
It's a lot more difficult to rise up and deliver a new product when you have your own one single engineering department and your own one single factory.
Sure.
So it's a lot more difficult, and you're trying to find people, hire people, train people. So the importation aspect gives a brand a very strong growth advantage.
Yep.
And that's difficult to compete with. And so what's happening now is that, the Made in USA, people talk about wanting to support Made in USA, but when they get right down to it, many times they don't. What's happening now is it feels like, actually ever since the Trump administration and a refocus on people understanding that if they support American business, that cycle of support will come back to them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you want your fellow Americans to be able to get paid more money, you have to pay more for a product made in the U.S. so that company can afford to pay that American citizen more money. So it's this cycle, and I think there was an understanding that was beginning to percolate in people. And then when the COVID hit, it really started to resonate once COVID hit in 2020.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of practical things happened too, because people saw their overseas pipelines of materials and raw goods or products really disrupted. So
Yes.
I mean, they saw that, like, let's say some competitor of yours that has knives that are made overseas. Well, now those knives aren't being shipped to them, and they're kind of stuck. And all their people are like, well, we can't.
Hey, there's empty pegs. There's empty pegs in the retail store. They got to put something up there.
Right, exactly. And I think that, when we think about this, whether it's the kind of stuff that we're talking about with knives and things like that, or if it's if we're talking about fuel, whatever it happens to be, there's 330 million people here in the U.S. We ought to do as much stuff, in our around ourselves and in the U.S. as possible, because we've got to take care of ourselves. It'd be like having a gigantic family and depending on somebody else to do all the support for you. That's just not smart.
No, and it's very, it's systemic, and it's very circular in that, like you talk about a minimum wage. Well, minimum wages are great, but you realize everybody's got to charge more in order to pay that wage. Yeah. Like it's a cycle. So your buying power you'll have more dollars, but they'll buy less. Like it all has to kind of rise together, and realizing that buying American made products helps our country is a solid realization.
Yeah, 100%. One of the things that we've, so I'll give you a little bit more of my backstory, maybe for the viewers as well and listeners. I was a software developer for a number of years before I jumped into being an entrepreneur, and we got the Wolf and Iron podcast, and we do beard oils and stuff like that. But I also have another business called Rustic in Maine. We make wedding rings out of historic woods and a lot of cool stuff. Everything's USA made. Everything's done by hand. I'm in my office now. The shop is over that way. And so people are out there like doing stuff while I'm talking on the phone here. But the cool thing is that people want to work with their hands. And when I was in the IT world, I was like, I really, it's a good thing. I get to make money. It puts food on the table and that kind of stuff. But I had a real strong desire to actually create something tangible. And when so many of our textile stuff and our manufacturing and hands-on good, like artistic
Yeah.
things, when those things get shifted overseas, we lose something because they're old school guys that we just like want to put our hands on something and have it made and a tangible thing go out. And I imagine that's important for what you guys do as well, and probably what you guys hear from your workers as well.
Well, I'll play on a little something you said, which
Okay.
is when you consider manufacturing, to me, and that's what you were talking about,
Yeah.
actual manufacturing, similar to mining or farming or creational lumber, you are you're creating from a few dollars worth of raw materials. You're creating a $50 product or a
Yeah.
$100 product. You're creating wealth. It didn't exist before you built that product. You didn't just move wealth around. You've created it, and I think that's why manufacturing is so important, because it creates wealth. It doesn't move it around. Now, for us, we're an internationally known company. We sell our knives all over the world. The sales that we do draw dollars into our little community. So instead of just spreading the dollars that are within the community around, we're actually drawing dollars and wealth from all over the world and focusing it in our community. And I think manufacturing is such a big part of that. We had a family meeting when we decided to relocate out of California. We had a discussion. Should we be a product development marketing company,
Yeah.
an import product, and have a headquarters with a few dozen people down in San Diego, California, which is a beautiful place to live and grow up? Or do we stay a manufacturer? And we felt like that, yeah, we didn't have a choice. We had to stay as a manufacturer. That was our brand. That was our authenticity. That's how we honor, my father, grandfather, and great grandfather. We stay in manufacturing, and thus that's what prompted our relocation to a place with a good labor pool and a lower cost of living, so that we could be competitive and still have employees thriving.
Yeah, that's really good and smart. And I say smart because there's one of the things I think companies miss out on is how well, when we say, we've got our label on a product and it says, whether it says Buck Knives or Rustic in Maine or Wolf and Iron, and then under that it says made in, that next thing actually speaks volumes about your brand and quality. Because if it says made in China, no offense to people in China, I think they should be able to make cool stuff, and they do make cool stuff, and sometimes they make some really good things. But there's across the board, there's just an understanding that if something's made in China, it's not as high quality as made in USA. So it may cost more. Maybe you have to sell your product for more. Maybe you have to appeal to a different market. But there's a brand value or recognition that goes along with made in USA that's unlike anywhere else, at least for us in the US, unlike anywhere else in the world. And we love seeing made in the USA. And, I think that's just key, that a lot of companies forget that. They think, oh, bottom dollar, we've got to be ultra competitive, have a really cheap product and a high markup on
Yeah.
that. So I think that's,
I will also say that an element of a long-term family business is you're not looking quarter to quarter. You're really looking out a little farther, and you're determining, okay, where are we going to be in 10 years? A lot of these CEOs only last 3 to 5 years and then move on to another gig. And so it's optimizing that fairly short-term view compared to a family business where, okay, manufacturing is in our blood. It's what we're going to be doing.
Yeah. Where
can we locate? Where can we set ourselves up on a long track that would be beneficial to us, and not just in the short term, but have a more long term view, which is what we did.
Yeah, no, it's solid, and it's obviously worked for you guys. Um, so let me talk about that. So you're coming into a family business. You kind of join up in 1978 as a kid, and you kind of work your way up, as you said, and get to the place where you're going to be a CEO. One of the things that CEOs do is that we kind of cast vision, and we start talking about, and especially if you're a marketing kind of CEO, you start to think about doing things differently. And how has that been accepted or resonated, or maybe even some challenges that come with that? Because you've got a century old business that's been doing things a certain way, and obviously changes along the way. But as you introduce new ideas, do you ever feel like you're betraying, like this is not how we do things, or do you feel that freedom of like, no, it's my show now, in a sense, I get a chance to take this on, and run it how I want to?
It's honestly, it's a little of both.
Yeah.
I remember, so just before my father passed away, we were looking at making automatic knives, switchblade knives, automatic knives.
Yeah.
And it was never something he'd let me do. And he just had really strong feelings about that. And so, so what we had was a discussion about deployment. How do you deploy a knife? How do you open the knife? Does it really make a difference whether you open it with your thumb, or you have a flipper on the back that you
Sure.
like? Does it really matter? Is it making a difference? And so we had a logic discussion where I was really glad I was able to have that with him while he was cognizant and before he died.
Yeah.
That I got the blessing to do the automatic knives. There's another one it was 1984. So I was new and special. I was doing new product development. And and it was a product we called the Buckmaster. It was developed with the Navy SEAL team in mind. And it was, it was the hollow handle, saw back. All that had just come out. And so we introduced the Buckmaster. And my father didn't want to do it. It was militaristic. It was fighting. It wasn't hunting hunting and everyday carry was his focus. And so we had this long discussion about these knives with the saw teeth on the back are terrible fighting knives. They're big, heavy. If you run the risk of if you push it into something, you won't be able to pull it back out again, right, and you lose your knife. So they weren't designed for fighting. They were designed for survival. And getting our heads around that shift is what allowed our own ideology to go, okay, that's we can do that. And if we're going to do it, we're going to do it the very best we can. So our whole ideology, to another question or kind of a statement that you've made, one of the harder things for me to do as a branding person was to go back and because so much of what my grandfather did was intuitive. It was biblical. Yeah. It was the golden rule. It was intuitive. And it was really hard to go back and delayer all the pieces that all went together for that success, and understanding those pieces, the authenticity element, the clean lines element, the no gimmicks element. I mean, there were so many little pieces that my grandfather was just intuitively, that's a good product. That's not a good, we're not going to do that product, or this one's not finished yet. It needs more refined. Like, he just had these instincts. And so that was really the more difficult piece, was to go back and unpack those instincts.
Yeah, because you want to honor that, because that,
yes,
not only
it was successful. I mean,
it was successful. That's what I was going to say. It was successful.
Yeah, I wanted to duplicate it or figure out how to evolve it to the next place. And you go, okay, that was the 1950s. That was the 60s and 70s. Okay, now here we are in the aughts or the tens now.
Yeah.
So what are the new technologies? What's the new, what are the youth of today looking for, and the next generation of knife users? what means the most, the weight, how it feels in your hand, how good the steel is, what's it worth to you? Hard to sharpen, but hold an edge forever. Easy to sharpen, but not hold the edge for. I mean, what matters to you? And so getting into the heads of your consumers and then translating that as represented by your own legacy or your own what your brand brings to the table, what it means, and letting that manifest in a way that resonates with the new generation of consumers. That's our challenge.
Yeah, no kidding. And I just want to. I had a thought when you were talking about you talking to your dad about automatic knives versus how do you open knives. And I just thought, man, it's so cool that these guys are geeking out over knife stuff. I mean, because you would think like at some point you'd be like, all right, I don't really care how a knife opens up. It's a knife, just sell it. That's how some people would go. But when it's in your blood and you really are passionate about that product, you talk about it your whole life, and it just matters to you.
Yeah. No, that's true. We wrote up a little booklet on how to sell a knife. So I really enjoy, one of my favorite things to do is like back when we had annual conventions and consumer shows, and I hope they come back. But the NRA show, the Western Hunting Conservation Expo, the National Wild Turkey Federation, like all of these annual shows where you're interacting with consumers.
Yeah.
And we would sell product there. Because one of my favorite things to do is sell product, interact with a consumer, have somebody come up. We got a bunch of stuff under the glass. We pull it up, put it on the table. We walk through. What do you need? What means more to you? How are you going to carry it? What are you going to use it for? Some of these materials will hold up under heavy use, but they don't hold up well under corrosion. So, if you're going to carry something more than use it, it'll stay sharper longer with a lesser blade steel than if you're going to use that thing all the time. It'll perform, a harder blade steel that's more conducive to corrosion is going to be your better choice. So I really enjoy, because it's like everybody having a face. Everybody's got a little different need set for the knife that would work out most perfectly for them. And I find it utterly fascinating and fun to figure that out.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. And that's actually, that kind of got me started. So the Guy's Guide to Pocket Knives book that I wrote, it actually started because of the question, why does my grandpa's knife have so many weird blades on it? Like what's got? Sometimes it has long blades, short blades, different things. And I noticed guys were asking these questions, and I thought, well, I don't really know. And as I started digging into it, it sort of became an article, which eventually became a book. And that's, but you're really right. It's men and just everybody. We have different work that we do. We have different needs for the knives. And so being able to interact with customers like that is really key. Same thing happens with us with Rustic in Maine, is that people go from seeing like a case of rings, or something that they can see maybe online. And they come up and they say, well, what's in this ring? And I say, well, this is actually rifle stock from a World War II, M1 Garand. And they're like, what?
Wow.
And I'm like, yeah. And maybe like, this is brass that we've had melted down from an old cartridge that somebody used, and we put that into this ring. Or, there's the story behind it, and that starts to come to life, and you can almost see their wheels turning like, well, could you do this? Could you make this? Could you do that? And that's so much fun because you're not really selling. You're just talking about the thing that you're passionate about, just like you and your dad were doing about automatic knives. It's just, you ask me a question, I'm just going to keep going because it's fun. I like to talk about it. Yeah. No, that's great. So you've mentioned that you guys are a Christian business, and I remember when we bought some buck knives stuff. Actually, with Rustic in Maine, we were just going to give some stuff away just because it's one of the things we do to support American-made businesses. So around Christmas time, we bought some things, and it came in with a little slip of paper in it, and maybe it was John 3:16 was on there or something like that. And I thought, these guys are solidly Christian, not like just behind the scenes Christian, but they're out in the open Christian values business. How has that guided you guys, throughout these years? Because you mentioned that really started from the very beginning, and I can see a lot of companies kind of trying to bury that piece, especially these days, trying to bury that piece and just be consumeristic.
No, we we have always started every single board meeting in prayer. So that was something my grandfather did from the beginning. So it was my grandfather, my father, the two guys from the church choir,
Yeah.
and a professional they brought in to do the accounting. So those five were the original board of directors. So yeah, prayer started every board meeting. So I'll tell you the story of that testimony.
Okay.
So back in the 70s, and my father would give his testimony, so I'm free to share this, but so he was unfaithful to my mom, and he lived with it for 2 or 3 years before he confessed and just about destroyed them. So they got in the car and drove across country back to where her parents were living. And we as kids, we stayed with neighbors, but just not knowing how everything was going to work out. And so the Lord put their marriage back together again. And there's a whole story of my mother going into a catatonic state in Oklahoma. They were in Tulsa. My dad ended up in the ORU prayer garden, the Oral Roberts University prayer garden.
Yeah.
On his knees, contemplating suicide, didn't know if my mom was ever going to come back. And she was healed, they were healed. And so, but when they ended up coming back, he just felt led to do something. And that testimony was his idea. Now, my grandfather wrote the original one. And so we've changed it when my grandfather passed away. Then we changed it to be from my father. Then when my father passed away in 2015, we've changed it to now be from me. But the basic message has been the same.
Yeah.
Welcome to the family.
Yeah. No, that's solid. And I think having those values like that, values that are more than just be on time, be a hard worker, whatever, what's your good values, but having something that really transcends all of that and brings people together, it guides a company, and it guides probably, I'm sure, the decisions that you guys make internally, even about who gets hired, who doesn't, who gets fired, and even certainly how you guys treat your customers, I would imagine.
Yeah. No, we're human, we mess up, but
Yeah.
But it's nice to kind of have that long, that milepost way out there in front of you to always course correct back. And to me, that's what biblical values and principles, that's what they do. They give you that mountain off in the distance that, even if you have to walk around some trees or you have to veer around a creek or something, you at least have that long-term goal to just course correct and get yourself back on track. And that's been us as a business.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I would imagine with so many years and all of that. And we're a Christian company as well. And we're very much forward about our faith, and we see it as we don't want to, I think I heard somebody say one time, I don't know where this quote came from, but if you're a Christian shoemaker, the best thing you could do is make awesome shoes. Not necessarily try to preach to every person who comes in to buy a pair.
Yes.
And so that's what we try to do, but we also try to be very evident, like, this is what we believe. We're God-centric, and these are the values we hold to. And we actually see that as a big part of our responsibility in just being a business and staying in business. So that, when we have those tough seasons, like we did with 2020, that's our first tough season because we're only 5 years old, but it was a heck one to go through. When we have those tough seasons, we tell ourselves we're in this business more than just to make money or just to keep the 40 people we have employed. There's something greater that's happening here. And maybe if we had started 25, 30 years ago, being a Christian business, I don't know if that would have been all that special, but nowadays it is. And it's interesting that you guys started as long ago as you did, and and that message is still really, really important.
Yeah. The message went in, I want to say it was like 77 or 78. When we started putting the message in every box, and we continue to do that.
Yeah. No, I think it's great. I think it's fantastic.
And there's some great stories. I mean, we've had one of my dad's favorite stories, and I read it at his funeral, was a woman who wrote to him and she went to the sporting goods store. She wanted to commit suicide by cutting her wrists,
Wow.
but she was afraid of the pain. So she went to the store to buy the sharpest knife, and the guy recommended a buck knife. So she bought this little buck knife and went home. And as she was contemplating, she opened the box, and that little note fell out and reached her. I mean, it touched her in, she was in a very, I mean, you can't get more vulnerable than that place.
Sure.
And it stopped her, and she sought help, and she recovered and became healthy, and ended up writing a letter to my father, which was one of his all-time favorite letters. There's some lighter duty ones where somebody stole a knife and that fell out and convicted them.
Yeah,
and he ended up sending my dad a check, which my dad returned to him with full forgiveness. But it was just so we had some light duty interactions like that, and some real heavy ones. My father would travel around and tell his testimony, the marriage healing testimony. And he would attend wild game banquets and church men's groups. But so where the fame of the knife company was a little bit of a bridge to reach someone that might not go to church, but would come to a wild game banquet, or would come to, be invited to a men's group, very casual, anyway, he ended up reaching, I think, lots and lots of people. Because it was a bit of a bridge.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've heard the Duck Dynasty guys, the Robertsons,
yes,
are very much similar. Very
similar.
People won't go to a church normally, but they'll hear that these fun guys are in town. They'll go show up, and next thing you know, they're getting baptized and all that. And I think
the Robertsons they're solid folk.
Yeah, they really are. Well, we got a few minutes here. I wanted to just ask, just at the end here, are there any books or anything that you've gone through where, that have been really helpful, or podcasts or anything that you're listening to where you're like, this is good advice coming from here? And I know I didn't cue you up with that with questions before.
No, you didn't. And yes, there have been. And I'm just at a loss to
Okay.
it's funny. I could tell you many Bible stories, but I struggle to quote verses. It's just not how I process.
Yeah.
I internalize things, put them in my own words, so I can tell the story.
Sure.
But I can't really quote. So I tend to do that with books as well. I absorb concepts, and
I'm the exact same way. And a lot of times I'll read a book and I'll finish it and I'll go, I don't remember if I knew that going into it, because I've already internalized it and it's become mine. And so sometimes I'll feel bad about, being on a podcast, and I'm like, well, I'll say something, and I'm like, did I make that up? Is that mine?
Man,
or did Jesus say that? I don't know. I probably should get clear on that.
Oh, that's totally me. And it's funny because my wife, Heidi, she'll catch me on that, because I'll make it my own. Yeah. You're not really intending, you're just talking.
Yeah.
And she's like, wait a minute, that was in that book, or that was, okay. Yeah, you're right.
So Summer, my wife, we work together, and she's talked about, we should do a podcast. And my fear is that she's going to just catch me on all these things, and I'll be like, man,
yes,
I sounded a lot better when I was doing this by myself. So all right.
That is so true.
Well, CJ, I really appreciate the conversation. I want to show this to my entire team. I know they're going to love it. I think what Buck Knives has done is inspirational. And I think it's a model that we want to try and mirror and follow ourselves as a business. And I'm just honored to be able to talk to you. This is exciting. And thank you so much.
Well, it was an honor. Thank you, sir.